So it was a great 2018 for the England national team. We all remember that very fondly, although of course the semi-final defeat was crushing as well. But 2019 is kicking off in the right vein as well. And this evolution of this England side has got the whole nation really excited, maybe too excited. You can tell I'm excited. I think I need to find a way of calming down. I'm going to do that by chatting to Kristan Heneage right now, because this man knows his stuff and also knows about the development of a lot of these players, which has been the most exciting part of this England journey. I saw a stat, Kristan, about the England team against Czechoslovakia, and that team had an average age of, I think it was about 24, which is obviously younger than the Nigeria squad, which was the youngest squad at the World Cup. And you've got all these young players coming through, yet the England squad looks like it's getting better. What were your feelings after watching the Czechoslovakia game? Obviously the scoreline was fantastic, but I think it was the performance, wasn't it? It was the style of play that was so impressive.
Absolutely. It was the style of play, and it was another system and another formation. I think that's what I kind of admire watching England for the last sort of 12, 18 months, is that they've progressed through things. They haven't settled on something that was successful. They keep taking little pages from each book that they come across and put them together to make this sort of compendium of ideas that I think is taking the country forward in quite a positive direction.
I saw an interview with Jordan Henderson. They're talking about how he's, one of I think he was either the second oldest or the oldest player in that team at 28. But as young as these players are, I think normally you'd think that these aren't intelligent footballers. But there's this new wave of British footballer, and I don't think it's just exclusive to the England team. I think you can also see it in the Welsh side and the players that they're bringing through as well. That the academies that have been so poor for so long, or seem to be so poor for so long when you look at the other leagues around the world, we're really seeing a kind of a clear character, a clear DNA of a young England player. What are your thoughts on that DNA and the fact that we're starting to see the fruits of it now?
I think it's funny you mentioned the word DNA, because that's kind of the buzzword around England. Dan Ashworth and that programme that he installed before he left to join Brighton, that idea that, yes, they want players who are technically excellent. I think the word they used was outstanding. But they also want them to be mentally sharp as well in terms of their decision-making and how they interpret the game in difficult moments. And I think actually what you're seeing here with these English players specifically is a two-pronged development of who they are. First and foremost, you've got the player side, the technical skill, all of those things that happen on the training pitch. But I think if we go back to just before the World Cup, try and think about what was the first sort of memory. It was Danny Rose coming out and saying, look, I've had depression. I've had a really difficult set of circumstances that have led me here that I haven't felt comfortable talking about, but I'm now going to open up. And I think that gave the players a depth, at least, with not just the media, but I also think with supporters. And one of the things that I think Gareth Southgate and that team deserve a lot of credit for is really revolutionising the way that England was covered. Yeah. Now, you can't always control how that's done. You look at the fact the team was leaked and how that sort of bred a little bit of fracture between the two. But again, it managed inevitably to be smoothed over by Gareth Southgate. Yeah. But that player media day, the 45-minute NFL type thing, the fact that Gareth is willing to go out there and take other ideas, not related to the sport that he's coaching in, and say, actually, I think this could benefit our group. I think for me, that's a flexible and almost quite pragmatic approach that we haven't really seen with England for a while. And I think that's why he's been able to sort of rise up this ladder in the way that he has, is because he's come with fresh ideas, but fresh ideas that actually hold a benefit to the national team in the long run. Yeah,
and fresh ideas, I think that are well-founded now. I think I was thinking about it and thinking about the players that have the golden generation that have come to the end now, and now we've got this second wave, this new wave of players. I think the difficulty for that group of players, the last generation, was that they were in this first era of social media, and I think they were all quite confused by it. I think they were caught in between being the sort of modern millennial guy who can talk about how he feels and can have depression. It's okay to have those problems, and that doesn't mean you're broken. It means that you're looking at something and you're trying to improve yourself, and it's something that happens. But the generation before, I think they closed off. I think they were scared, and they were caught in between two generations of the generation before that, where they were all able to kind of go out and drink and have that camaraderie. They were kind of caught in between being professional but having a human side to them as well. Whereas I feel like these guys now, and Raheem Sterling I think is a great example, and he almost got thrust into it a little bit earlier than the others, and is now setting an example for these new guys that he's the evolution of him as a person and as a player, and how he's perceived by the football media. I think he's a great example of how modern footballers are looking at the game now. That I think they're understanding. I think a lot of it is actually down to the kind of the understanding of the American way of sport, and also an understanding of social media and what it can do for you as a brand. And if you haven't got a personality to match up with the influence that you'll get as naturally being a sort of famous footballer, then you're selling yourself short a little bit now. So all these new lads, they seem to be a lot more comfortable with a camera in their face or having to do an interview. Have you noticed that as a journalist who ends up talking to these players? Are you seeing a move to more sort of media savvy and media comfortable footballers?
Yeah, I think that's a bit of a global thing. In truth, I think you're seeing younger players who are more confident in what they want to discuss. And how they articulate themselves. I think social media plays a part in that. I think because you're constantly expressing yourself on a platform where people can sling arrows, I think it does make you tougher individually, but I think it makes you a little bit more receptive to different ideas, as well as quite strong in your own. I think it develops you in a different way. We do look at social media as quite a negative thing, and to me, it's fascinating you talk about those generational shifts. I think we've had a social change, certainly, about being willing to discuss problems, specifically through the lens of being men with mental health problems, as an example. I look at someone like Trevor Sinclair, who quite touchingly just the other night
I saw that,
tweeted out that, I've literally been in tears. I still really miss my mum. I don't know if Trevor Sinclair can do that interview 5-10 years ago. I always think back to that really horrific front page about Frank Bruno when he was going through some stuff, and the headline "Bonkers Bruno." It's that insensitivity that will always shut a professional athlete off, because they think, well, what's the point? Why would I want to add more fuel to that fire that I'm trying to put out already? And I think that's where this culture that Gareth has created, with those open media days, the NFL style, where you can just come in and ask them anything you want. It can be funny, it can be a bit deeper and a bit more heart-wrenching. It's up to you how you use the time that you're allotted. That freedom, in some ways, I think it's a sign of how much they trust the players. But I also think it's a challenge to the journalists to come in and say, look, do something that's merit-worthy. Make it impactful. Don't try and just chop something up that will sell a headline or get people to click on it. Give it some depth and some actual gravitas, because you've got the opportunity now that you keep telling us that you don't have. And I think the greatest compliment you can pay to that is the fact that the German FA tried to come in and study what England were doing with their media duties. They saw clearly a benefit in that. So I think that's the greatest compliment you can give Gareth in terms of moving that discussion and that situation forward.
Let's talk about Jadon Sancho, because I think he's identified a new blueprint for forward-thinking footballers in terms of what they want to do with their career and how they can get the opportunities. Gareth Southgate, I think it was the 26th debut he gave in the Czechoslovakia game, which is, again, it shows an understanding of the situation that England are in terms of these exciting young footballers, but also the bravery to go and do it. But Jadon Sancho's been very brave, firstly from being a southern lad to moving up to Manchester, and then again to move abroad to get that first team football. How impressed have you been with his development?
Massively. I think players like him, Reece Nelson, they're a product of their environment, very literally, in so much as they grew up in London where there's not a lot of green spaces. So you play in car parks, you play very narrow streets, and that can make you technically more proficient. I've seen with the US, this Claudio Reyna talk about, we need more street footballers. So it's clearly something that a lot of nations abroad take notice of and see a benefit in. But I think what you have to give him immense credit for is, as you say, pushing that boat out and being willing to go abroad when there's not a lot of success stories there. We've seen Reece go over there. Smith Rowe has gone to RB Leipzig. There's players now more willing to travel and immerse themselves in new cultures. I think that's always the most difficult part. I look at someone at the sort of apex of this is Gareth Bale, who we read now these stories that I think have other means, talking about him being an outsider, not really fitting in, not speaking Spanish, all of these different things. And yet someone like Jadon Sancho, I think, is integrating himself more. I think he's having that same success, but he's taking the experience for what it is. And I think you have to admire someone that approaches it with that confidence and self-assurance, because he could have very easily sat at Manchester City and waited things out. He could have even tried to force a move internally. I mean, you look at Raheem Sterling, he went from Liverpool to Man City. There's probably a decent chance he could have gone abroad. But I think what you also have to acknowledge at the same time is that these clubs now want these English players. They see a benefit. Yeah. I think Miguel Delaney wrote a piece to that effect, that you speak to, sporting directors and scouts in France and Germany. They see this wealth of talent that just isn't being utilised by English clubs. So you can go in and pick up a Sancho for, let's say a few £1 million. And we're talking about already him being sold for 10 times that back to England. So there's a market and a benefit for these foreign clubs that I think will keep that pipeline going.
Yeah, I think it's a three-way thing, isn't it? I think you've got the development of these players. We said right at the start of this video, Dan Ashworth, who's now at Brighton Hove Albion, he's left, but he went there in 2013. And again, that buzzword, DNA, trying to create intelligent players who are so comfortable on the ball that it allows them to find solutions. And Jadon Sancho is one of those players. So you're creating a better product. We're down the line now with the Premier League and again, those top clubs and how difficult it is to break through. And they've seen enough examples of players that don't get the opportunity that they now look at the loan system or just being brave and going abroad, and they don't see it as a backward step. They actually see it as a forward step to get them the development that they need and the games that they need to be a much more impressive and well-rounded footballer when they get to 25, 26. Something I saw that I thought was fascinating was that of the teams to make the last 16 of the Russia World Cup, England had the highest number of loan spells accumulated among their squad, with an average of 2 loan spells per player. So I think that's it as well. So I think sometimes it takes a little bit longer for the rest of us to see the sort of the patterns and the understanding of it all. But you can see so many of these players. Harry Kane, was it 4 loan moves? They're looking at it totally different now. And I think as time goes on, we'll see, and I think we are already, we're seeing, say, Hudson-Odoi. I think it was a slight side note because it's an easy title to chuck out there, it's easy stat to chuck out there in terms of the fact that he hasn't started a Premier League game. But he's done well at England at lower, younger levels, and us as England fans, we now trust Gareth Southgate that, this, the conveyor belt of talent. If you say he's good enough, he is good enough, and it's all creating a really exciting product and an exciting environment for what can come in the next 5 or 6 years. I mean, Southgate's got to be the final guy that we've got to talk about and what he's done. It's been an incredible influence that he's had on this team. Where do you see this England squad going? Do you think? I think naturally England fans will get a little bit overexcited. People are probably writing in the comments right now, James, you're getting overexcited. But how far do you think these players can go? How do you think we can go and do something special? What will be the indicators in the next few years of that?
I think it'll be that sustained development of especially the tactical ideology when it comes to tournaments. You look at the process that took them to the World Cup. They started with, Harry Kane's our best player. We want to try and get the most out of him. They looked at a 4-2-3-1. They looked at a 4-3-3. They didn't believe that was going to work against the elite level teams, your Germanys, Portugals, etc. So then they thought, it's a back three, but a 3-4-3, which is what Conte was using around that time in the Premier League. They didn't like that because of what it did to the midfield. They didn't feel it had enough control. So that then becomes a 3-5-2. And that's a process that bores itself out in the friendlies around that time. If you watch them, there is a definite shift and a clear shift through those different tactical formations until they reach that 3-5-2 that we kind of associate with the World Cup. Yeah. You then move past that and it changes again to where the Spain game, I think it's a 4-3-3 possibly. It's that idea of we don't stop trying to refine the process because it's a constant process essentially. Yeah. And you keep bringing through those players. I think that's the other thing that we sometimes forget about Southgate is he has been quite ruthless with this England team as well. Wayne Rooney was put out to pasture, I think, in a fairly dignified way, actually, with everything. But he was still phased out. Joe Hart was phased out. Chris Smalling was deemed not good enough with the ball at his feet, so was phased out. And it's that ability to say, okay, people may not think Harry Maguire, for example, is the best defender possibly in England at the moment, but I trust him because he gives me what I need for this system. I think at the same time, he's kept a loyalty to some of those players, Kieran Trippier, Maguire, who haven't been that great this season. So I think his willingness to exert his control and his vision, that's very difficult in a country like ours. We are very critical of our national team in the way that we cover it and the way that we overanalyze every decision. We really don't give decisions time to breathe. And yet I think the thing with Gareth is a lot of his decisions have bore fruit. In the long term, they've been vindicated. And I think you look at the World Cup, you look at what they've been able to do since the Nations League.
Yeah.
They've now got this summer opportunity against the Dutch side that I must admit I wasn't blown away by against Germany. I thought they were quite poor for long periods. And they've got a chance to win something there. But I think he'll be first to admit that really you do need that first bit of success at the senior level. We've seen it with a lot of the youth national teams. They've been able to win things. They've been able to feel it. That's we talk a lot about tangibles, but it's intangibles too. It's that idea of I'm a champion. I'm the best in the world. I know what that feels like. So I won't maybe feel that pressure next time I'm in a semi-final or a final. And I think things like that, the other indicator that sticks out to me just finally is that penalty shootout against Colombia. I think, look, there are a number of those players who weren't even born, when we were watching penalty shootouts growing up. And yet, at the same time,
they still felt the weight,
they laid a lot. Yeah, I think at the same time, they laid a lot of ghosts to rest. I don't know if Joe Hart, for example, saves those penalties that Jordan Pickford did. And it's that idea of you make that bold decision. You bring in a goalkeeper that A, is good with his feet, that is you think is the future, and you bring him in early. And then he rewards you with those kind of saves. And the same with Eric Dyer. So I think it's been a process that we need to give time before we start really trying to pick it apart and say, well, this is wrong or that's wrong.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it is about psychological hurdles, because once you've jumped over them, you then get a thirst for breaking them down. And I think you're right. I think that the younger players, having won the under-17s, having won a load of tournaments, the fear of, am I able to be a champion? Am I able to win a tournament? Even if, of course, it's not a World Cup. You understand how it feels and what you need to do to get there. And more importantly, you're not afraid of going and winning it again. Actually, in truth, you've actually got a greater thirst to go and do it. That Spain game, yes, we were hanging on for dear life at the end of it, but beating those big sides, that's probably a little hurdle that they'd created from the World Cup, where they played teams that weren't that great, that we were expected to beat, but we weren't able to beat the Croatians or the Belgians. So going and doing that with Spain, and I think the next chapter is the Nations League. Can we go and win that? There's no reason. You've got, Portugal, Switzerland and Holland. There's no reason why England can't and shouldn't even be favourites probably for that tournament. And so then that's another hurdle that's broken down, and they're all little steps, aren't they, on the way? So I think it's an exciting time to be an England fan. I think it's great that we can see the sort of fruits of the labour of the last 10 years, pretty much, in terms of the development of the players. Kristan, where can people find your great writing?
At KHENEAGE on Twitter.
There you go. Right, so check out Kristan's writing. It's superb. It always is. Also, just go follow him on Twitter as well, because it's always good. He always enlighten you with little bits and pieces. If you're new to the channel and you've enjoyed this video, why not hit the like button, subscribe to Ball Street, and we'll see you very soon.